This week on the GCN Racing News Show, Primoz Roglic won, Tadej Pogacar nil. The current kings of stage racing went head-to-head for the first time this season, and it was Roglic who took the spoils. The biggest win of the week, though, was for Fabio Jakobsen, who is back competing for the first time since that life-changing crash at last year's Tour of Poland. We'll also look back at the men's and women's Scheldeprijs and look ahead to a whole heap of great racing to come. Plus, we've got a descending masterclass from Alex Aramburu. Before all of that though, I'm going to start with something a lot more serious. A couple of weeks ago, I was here on the Racing News Show talking about whether or not Nacer Bouhanni should receive a sanction and possibly a short ban from competition for swerving off his sprinting line at the Grand Prix Cholet Pays de la Loire, which put Jake Stewart into the barriers at high speed. Since then, Bouhanni has been the victim of online racial abuse. Not just one isolated case, which would be unforgivable in itself, but multiple insults, some of which he copied and posted to his social media. This is abhorrent. There is no place for this anywhere, not in cycling, not in sport, not in any part of society. Now, I stand by my comments on that show. I do not think what Bouhanni did in that sprint was acceptable. However, Nacer, you have my full support on this, our full support on this. These people should be utterly ashamed of themselves, quite frankly. We will not tolerate this in cycling or anywhere else, and we need to repeat that until we are red in the face. Our sport clearly has a lot to do to rid itself of racism. I know we need to do more, I know I need to do more, but in reality, we can all work together to stamp racism out. And we can start by calling these people out for what they are, racists who are not welcome here. Now, bike racing seems quite trivial after you've read comments like those aimed at Bouhanni, but we are going to move on from a very bad news story to a very good one. Fabio Jakobsen. How good is it to finally see him pin a number back on? Any of you who witnessed those terrifying images of this Tour of Poland crash last August will no doubt be astounded, as I am, that he's back on his bike at all, let alone back to racing. It's been 7 months now since that incident, and for Jakobsen, I'm sure it was the longest 7 months of his life. He was initially placed in a coma, of course, and his list of injuries was extensive. A fractured skull, the loss of 10 teeth and parts of his jaw, a brain contusion, a broken nose, and a torn palate. And when you think about it, 7 months to recover from something that traumatic is nothing. In that time, Jakobsen has been through multiple reconstruction surgeries, but managed to get back on his bike last November, then to a team training camp in January, and in the 3 months since, he's had more surgery for dental implants, got engaged to his girlfriend Delors, and yesterday, the former Dutch champion lined up with his teammates at the Tour of Turkey. Now for me, that is the biggest victory of his cycling career so far. In fact, I almost had a tear in my eye yesterday as he waved to the camera, and it was just so heartwarming to see how many of the riders in the bunch gave him a pat on the back to welcome him back. Even if he never wins another race in his life, what he has achieved in such a short space of time really is quite remarkable. And here's what he had to say just before the first stage of that Tour of Turkey.
Racing is a fair sport, bike racing also. I think we are considering our anti-doping protocols and programs, we are a sport that stands for fair sports and safe sports. So the same goes for the bike handling and the way people are in the bunch. And I crashed because of a mistake, and I have to get back the confidence that my competitors will race in a fair way, because I think that's important and that's what makes the sport beautiful. Because something that like what happened to me is not what you want for anybody or anyone. It's horrible, and sport should be fair, and that's why I'm here also to get back that trust again in my colleagues.
Forza Fabio, absolutely brilliant. At the first stage of that race did finish in a sprint. Christopher Halverson of Uno X looked to have the win in the bag, but he was just pipped on the line in a photo finish by Arvid de Klein of Rally Cycling, who's apparently known as the Little Gorilla. The stage had to be revised due to heavy snow where it was originally set to take place, but normal weather is expected to resume in a couple of days' time. Stop press. Just after we finished recording the Racing News Show this morning, we discovered it wasn't just Fabio Jakobsen who is back. Mark Cavendish is back too. to his winning ways. It's been over 3 years since he won a professional bike race, but today he took his 147th by winning stage 2 of the Tour of Turkey. Let's replay that now with commentary from Carlton Kirby that we watched on GCN+.
Oh, it's a phenomenal finish. Heads up, we get the view of it right now. Round the outside, Mark Cavendish, he's got the drive here, has he? He sees a spear, he sees a space, he's done it! Mark Cavendish has done it! First win since 2018. He gets to the line perfectly. What about that? He is so pleased. I am so pleased. And the world of cycling should be pleased as well.
Meanwhile, the Tour of the Basque Country represented the first head-to-head battle between Primož Roglič and Tadej Pogačar since those incredible scenes at the Tour de France last August. And I must say, it did not disappoint. The race was intriguing as much for the tactical battle between UAE and Jumbo-Visma as for the fight between the two heavyweights of men's stage racing. Or lightweights, as I suppose they'd be better described. The first blow was landed by Primož Roglič, who put almost half a minute into Pogačar in the opening time trial. In fact, it was Brandon Mcnulty who pushed Roglič closest there, losing by just 2 seconds over 14 kilometres. And it was the American who became so instrumental in how the race was played out over the 5 following road stages. Stage 2 saw the first descending masterclass by Alex Aramburu, more on that later, with Pogačar picking up 4 bonus seconds in 3rd place behind him. Then Stage 3's summit finish revealed that Pogačar and Roglič were in a class of their own on the climbs, with every attack by one marked by the other, each time creating a gap to some of the best climbers in the world behind them. In the end, Pogačar managed to win the 2-up sprint to the line and moved himself to within 20 seconds of that race lead. However, it wasn't him that took the race lead the following day, but rather his teammate Mcnulty in what looked like a bizarre tactical decision by Jumbo-Visma. Now, the race had been chaotic over the final 2 climbs of Stage 4, and in that chaos, a group including Mcnulty, as well as Roglic's teammate Jonas Vingegaard, went clear. And their gap rose, and rose, and rose. Vingegaard wasn't pulled back to the pace behind. Even Tolhoek and Oman weren't really doing everything they could in that group behind. Clearly they had a plan, it just wasn't obvious to the rest of us what that plan was exactly. In the end, Jon Izagirre took the stage in a sprint from Pello Bilbao. Mcnulty picked up 4 bonus seconds in 3rd, and with a 49-second gap to the next group, it meant he held the yellow jersey by 23 seconds over Roglič. Maybe Jumbo-Visma didn't want to defend over the last 2 days. Maybe they wanted to test the strength of UAE Team Emirates in defending a jersey ahead of this year's Tour de France. Maybe they just wanted to try something different. Who knows? But it certainly wasn't the way that most of us expected them to ride. Stage 5 was the only nailed-on Sprinters' Day, except it wasn't because the Koenig Quick-Step bossed things in the break and took a 1-2 with Mikel Honoré and Joseph Cherney, and so it all came down to the final stage on Saturday. And what a stage it was! 112 Ks with 7 categorised climbs, including 1 right at the very beginning. Attacks were flying from the start, including from some pretty big names. Now, UAE Team Emirates had a semblance of control, but as the attacks continued to fly, they decided to put Mark Hirschi in a move. Not unheard of course, for a team leading the race to do that, but it did mean that with Mcnulty as leader and presumably Pogačar as protected rider too, that did not leave them with many domestiques to do the work. Nevertheless, they were still in control until this happened. Astana making their trade team attack over the top of the 4th climb of the day, and this is where UAE started to come unstuck. Mcnulty and Pogačar should have accelerated as soon as they saw Astana move up, but they didn't, and they were far enough down the group that they were behind a split, whilst Roglič was in front of it. The next mistake they made was not sending Mark Hirschi back to help immediately. Pogačar himself was having to do a lot of the chasing, and they even came more unstuck when Mcnulty got into difficulty on the next climb of the day. That left a decision to be made on the road as to whether Pogačar should stick with him or forge on for his own ambitions. A decision that took some time to make and which might have prevented Pogačar from making contact with what was now the front group. Roglič, meanwhile, was cool as a cucumber and strong as an ox. He forced the pace on the penultimate 1st category climb once he heard Pogačar was closing in, and despite no initial help from Carthy and Gaudu, he pressed home his advantage over the key GC rivals behind him. And that, ultimately, was the race sewn up. Carthy was dropped on the final climb of the day, which left Roglič and Gaudu to make a deal. GC for Roglič, stage win for Gaudu. They say there are no gifts in cycling, but you can still exchange them, obviously. Roglič then taking the win and the King of the Mountains jersey and the points jersey, Jumbo-Visma winning the team's classification, and Jonas Vingegaard taking the young rider classification. I may have questioned their tactics, but hey, it didn't work out too badly for them in the end, did it? And I think they'll have learnt a lot from that week ahead of the bigger races to come this season. For Roglic, that marks his 10th GC win from his past 16 stage races. And if he hadn't crashed out of Paris-Nice and last year's Dauphiné, that stat could be even more impressive. Of those that he has finished, on only one has he been off the podium. That was the 2018 Tour de France, where he finished 4th. Consistency with him really is an understatement. And there was no rest for him either after his latest win. Less than 24 hours later, he was back out on his TT bike at 7 in the morning in the rain in France to look at one of the time trial stages of this year's Tour de France. And then later the same day, he was 500 k's away in another part of France to ride the other Tour de France individual time trial course. I mean, that is some level of dedication, and I guess a glimpse into what it takes to be that good. Now, just before we finish with the Tour of the Basque Country, I promised you that descending masterclass from Alex Aramburu. We all love a montage, don't we? Particularly when it comes to high-speed, skillful descending. Cue music, cue montage. I love that. We have ourselves a new descending demon, ladies and gentlemen. Just before we move on, a look at what's coming up on GCN Plus this week. Well, the Tour of Turkey will continue through to Sunday. That one is available in all GCN Plus territories. On Wednesday, the Vuelta Valenciana starts. That's a race in southern Spain, which was postponed from February. 5 days, 615 Ks, including a summit finish on Friday and an individual time trial the following day. Those two stages should shape the general classification, but the favourites for that general classification are a little uncertain at the moment because the start list, as we record this at least, is a little thin on the ground. Arnaud Démare and Caleb Ewan are set to do battle in the sprints, but on the climbs, Alejandro Valverde is really the only big name rider currently confirmed. And that might well be because many of his adversaries have switched their attention to the hillier Spring Classics. Now, I shall refrain from calling them the Ardennes Classic, because there's only 2 of the 4 actually in the Ardennes. So, Liège-Bastogne-Liège and La Flèche-Wallonne next week, but this week it's Brabantse Pijl on Wednesday and the Amstel Gold Race this Sunday. Van Aert, Matthews, Ulissi, Van Avermaet, Colbrelli amongst the big names on the men's side for Wednesday's race, with Van Vleuten, Moulin-Pasio, Vollering and Rivera on the women's side. And we're actually also filming our Amstel Gold preview show today, so you'll be able to watch that on Thursday here on GCN Racing. All those races I've just mentioned are available to watch live on GCN Plus in Europe and the Asia Pacific, excluding Australia, New Zealand and China. I will have a pre- and post-race show on Sunday for both races, in fact, with guests Danny Rowe, Adam Blythe and Brad Wiggins. Further to the racing, Magnus Bagstedt will be back on the couch for the World of Cycling this Wednesday, discussing, amongst other things, those very intriguing tactics that played out at the Tour of the Basque Country. And then we've got 2 more documentaries landing this week, including the next instalment of Chris Boardman's Heartlands. And it's another brilliant watch, I've got to say. As ever, all of our films are available in all GCN Plus territories. Right, let's get on to another pair of races from last week now, the Scheldeprijs on Wednesday. 114 years after the inaugural men's edition of the race, Wednesday saw Flanders Classics run the first ever women's Scheldeprijs. Held under very different conditions to the Tour of Flanders a couple of days previous, the race split into echelons early with a very strong group looking like they'd forged clear. However, it wasn't to be, and the race would ultimately come down to a bunch sprint. And if you're looking for a favourite for a bunch sprint in women's racing, you need look no further than Lorena Wiebes of Team DSM. Now, it has been a tough season so far for the Dutch woman, with that horrible looking crash at the first stage of the Healthy Aging Tour. But after a drag strip race to the line with Emma Norsgaard of Movistar, she came up trumps to take her first win of the season. Fair play to Norsgaard though, what a season it's been for her. That was her 10th day of racing this year so far and her 5th second place. And I don't think there's anybody out there who isn't looking forward to seeing her take her first win. Can't be far away now, surely. In the men's race, we did have splits again pretty much from the get-go, but unlike in the women's, they stuck. A number of sprinters made the front selection, but with Seneschal, Van Leeuwenberger, Morku, Cavendish and Bennett all in the 30-man group for De Koning Quick-Step, it looked like it was theirs to lose. But lose it, they did. And it appeared to be because they couldn't decide whether to work for Bennett or Cavendish. Mercure did his best to lead out both of them, but Alpecin Fenix made a late acceleration on the right-hand side of the road, with Jasper Philipsen taking advantage of the extra momentum and upsetting the favourites on the day. It was the first win of the season for the Belgian, and I think he'll be delighted with that, especially given the riders he beat. De Koning Quickstep could have played the finale a lot better, you've got to say, but then getting the better of Sam Bennett in the sprint is quite the achievement at the moment, however you go about doing it. In other news, Cofidis have extended their sponsorship of that team until the end of next year, 2022, with a budget increase of €1.5 million, bringing the team's budget up to 13 million in total. Still a modest one compared to most World Tour teams, it's got to be said. That extension will take the team into its 26th season in professional cycling, making it one of the longest running sponsorships that the sport has ever seen. And the good news doesn't stop there. They also confirmed they'll have a women's team next year. It's going to have a continental licence in its first season and a budget of €1 million, and that means there will be at least 9 top flight teams with both a men's and a women's outfit in 2022. Onto a subject now, though, that has been more prevalent than ever this year in pro cyclists: heart problems. Diego Ulissi was forced to take a break after health checks revealed a problem with his. Elia Viviani and Zdenek Stybar have both had minor operations after their heart scares. Thankfully, all of them are either already back competing or are set to later this season. However, the Frenchman Romain Sicard has been forced to retire due to a cardiac anomaly. Sicard won the Tour de l'Avenir and the Under-23 World Champs in 2009 and has been a pro ever since. Now, it's obviously not a tough choice to make when your life is potentially at risk, but certainly a bitter pill to swallow nonetheless when you've dedicated most of your life to one single thing. The great thing, though, is that these problems are being diagnosed before something serious happens. All the best for the future, Romain. Right then, that is all for today. Don't forget to tune in for our Amstel preview show on Thursday right here on GCN Racing, and indeed for all the live racing if you're in the right territory. I'll hopefully see you on Sunday for our Amstel pre and post race shows, but if not, I hope to have your company again on this show this time next week. Goodbye for now.